Hey. Cool. Okay. Woo! Well, it's great to see so many people here today. My name's Catherine Robertson. I was the candidate in the previous federal election for this area, for the Fraser electorate, and I'm now where we did very well. Highest socialist vote in several decades. Go the West. So, and I'm now the lower house candidate out in the Laverton electorate. So I'll just be, to kind of give everyone here a sense of how tonight's going to go, we're going to have two kind of discussions, I guess sections of discussion. The first one is going to start with Liz here. Liz, I'll introduce Liz in a second, but we're just going to chat about some of the early kind of activism that Liz was involved in alongside some of her longtime comrades. And then we'll have a break for dinner. So we've got dinner here tonight if people would like to, and we encourage everyone here to have a meal with us. You can get food tickets at any of the kind of Victorian Socialist stalls. And then after our little food break, we're going to go back into kind of Victorian Socialists today and what we've been involved in out here in the West. And throughout it all, I'll be chatting to Liz alongside, a bunch of people here tonight that have been activists, socialists, rabble-rousers for several decades. So before we begin, I guess, the formal part of the discussion, I just wanted to acknowledge that this meeting, this chat takes place on the stolen land of the Kulin nations, of the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung people. So socialism is a long-time ally, stands in solidarity with the Indigenous resistance that's taken place ever since colonisation on this land. And Footscray, of course, is actually a real hub of radicalism, of Indigenous history of resistance here. So, it's important to acknowledge that and say we stand in solidarity and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So, to begin, Jazz, I thought we would, the slides, let's start with baby Liz. So I didn't formally introduce Liz, I kind of jumped past that, but if people do not know, I'm sitting up here with Liz Walsh, the Victorian Socialist candidate for the upper house of the Western Metro. So and Liz and I are both joined for this section of the meeting with Mick Armstrong, who is a veteran socialist and for many, many decades and a founding member of one of the largest socialist organisations and a organisation that's part of the Victorian Socialist Coalition, which is the Socialist Alternative. So I thought that, where we'd start, naturally, is chronologically with the youngest part of Liz's life. So when she first got involved in activism, why don't you, tell us, Liz, about how you kind of found yourself being a radical and getting involved?
Well, I have actually a memory, I think it's a real one, but I have a memory of sitting in the car with my mum, turning to her and saying, "Mum, I think I'm left wing." It was true. And not at all something that I had to fight for in my household. I've got very left-wing and progressive parents, luckily. And the first, though, protest that I went to that weren't with my parents was against Pauline Hanson. So when Pauline Hanson came to the national political stage, when she was elected in 1996, there was a big protest movement that erupted against her racism, her attacks on Asian people, her calls for anti-Asian immigration controls, her attacks on Aboriginal people, the fact that she called Aboriginal people privileged, and so on. She also called for the strap to be brought back in high school. So we also had a reason to protest her as students. And the whole, I guess at the time, the Murdoch Press printed her speech in full, her maiden speech, shamefully. And there were people that tried to say protesting her was giving her a spotlight. You should stop, just ignore her, she'll go away. But the reality was that big corporate media was giving her a platform. We needed to be there to say, she is actually a divisive political figure that there is mass opposition to. And there were thousands of high school students that participated in walkouts from high school, left school and went into the city. And that was some of my first protests where we yelled through the streets. And in particular, I remember Rage Against the Machine blaring as the protest ended, killing in the name of. People kind of remember, fuck you, I won't. Anyway, that really resonated with me as a high school student. The defiance and the swearing, and just generally it was wonderful to be out on the streets with thousands of other young people protesting racism. And then I got involved in the movement against the Jabiluka uranium mine. So that was, I think, actually the same year. And the Jabiluka uranium mine was to be built on Mirarr land, Aboriginal land, against their wishes. There was already a uranium mine in Kakadu National Park, the Ranger mine, and they were trying to build another one. And there was a mass protest movement across the country against that. And I would go to blockades actually against the company's headquarters in St Kilda Road, North Limited. And I remember dressing up in hazmat suit, in all white suit, with green sort of sludge on my face, paint, as we were kind of pretending to be impacted by radiation. And and we tried to kind of disrupt the operations of the business those mornings. And the thrilling thing about that campaign, which involved blockades up at the mine site in Kakadu, blockades down in the city that I was involved in as a high school student, but also mass protests, and we won that campaign. We stopped the mine from being built. And it gave me a taste of that. When ordinary people get together, when we organise, when we resist, we can have an impact on our world, we can actually win. So that catapulted me into political activism, really, ever since.
Great. Well, I think actually the next slide we do have is your parents. Speaking of your left-wing, history at S11. I mean, it's amazing also, like Jabiluka, for anyone here that's been involved in environmental activism, is a real reference point for mass struggle winning. And I know when I was campaigning against the Adani coal mine, all the way back in 2019, decades later, it was a thing that we talked about as a real illustration of the environmental movement winning in Australia. So after, your high school days of painting sludge on your face and rabble-rousing, screaming, killing in the name of, you went to university, Melbourne University. And that's where I suppose the journey begins between Mick and Liz and long-time radicalism, socialism. So I've been chatting to Mick about some of his memories of Liz when she went to university and some of the stuff that the Socialists got up to. So I think we have a photo actually of one of the stories, that Mick's going to share. This is before the digital age, so we really had to go back through some family albums to get these photos. But Mick, what are some of the kind of political actions that you remember of the early socialist period in university?
Before I go into some of the stories, though, I'd like to make a general point, because if Liz gets elected, well, Parliament is a snake pit. There's going to be all these vile, disgusting people there. And if we're going to send a socialist into this hothouse, disgusting place, you need to have somebody who's going to stand up for themselves, argue, fight back. And I've served on lots of committees, many years with Liz, and she's definitely somebody who'll argue her position, stand up, not be intimidated by people like me who've been around 20 years more, and so on. That's the sort of person we want, not some person that just shuts up and goes along. But, well, I'll start with the story there. That was from the Iraq War, when US and Australia invaded. And at Melbourne Uni, the students decided they were going to have a protest, and they advertised everywhere. Posters all up campus. They were going to burn the US flag in protest against the war. And on the day, a lot of people turned up, but there was a big cohort of American students there, who were having a go at us, but they're only having a go at us on the basis of saying, you're nationalists. You're only burning the American flag. Why won't you burn the Australian flag? So, well, we thought, well, you know, let's go for it then. So we had an Australian flag ready for the occasion, and that is going up in flames. And then the Liberal students attacked us at that stage. They weren't so on the offensive when it was just the American flag. But so then there's a brawl going on, you know, and over the flag, and then they poured, you know, methylated spirits and everything to get it going. And in the middle of the brawl, it catches fire, and one of the comrades' backpacks starts going up in flame as well. So a great event, and that's one of the first stories I remember being involved with Liz. The other one on campus was there was a student protest where we smashed our way into the administration building and got into the top floor with the vice chancellor and everything, and threw all these files out the windows and all that. You know, it's fun and games, sort of just the average run-of-the-mill student protest. But usually, up to then, you know, the cops might come, but they'd say, oh, it's a student protest, ignore them and all that. And that, funny enough, was sort of the attitude of the cops, you know, oh, well. But the university administration really put the pressure on the cops to prosecute and that. So, you know, and so a lot of people were charged. And Liz got diversion to go and plant trees. You know, it's a good environmental activity. That was the penalty. The students had to go off and plant trees as their thing. So, you know, so you don't get a conviction out of that. But, you know, so that's illegal activities. Where I, as being older, was sent off to the Salvation Army to pick clothes for them. So exactly why. The other story of finally, not a student protest, but it relates to the West actually, because one of the horrors out in the West, of course, is at Maribyrnong, where we have a vile concentration camp, what we did have for years. And, you know, we're refugees, we're incarcerated there and that. And after people might remember there was the protest at Woomera, which led to a breakout, a combination of the protesters outside and the refugees inside, you know, forcing their way out, and some of them escaped. You know, I know one of them eventually made it to Canada and got away, and that. Anyhow, in the wake of that, the more left-wing section of the refugee campaign said, well, it's one thing to protest in the desert and break people out, but we've got to bring that back to the cities where most people are. So we called for a big protest out at Maribyrnong, and this wasn't just to be, we'll stand around, you know, abuse the cops and all that protest. No, we were going to rip down the fence and get in and get them out. That was our intention anyhow. And we actually did stalls in the city for money to buy bolt cutters to cut down the fence, you know, so we're pretty public about it. And that we weren't, you know, hiding our light under a bushel and all that. And that, but unfortunately, on the day, strangely enough, there was a big police presence, and that, would you believe? You know, the police are not on our side. Maybe everybody didn't know that, and our numbers weren't great enough, and that we did attack the fence. We got one of the outer fences down, which was good, but the big fence, you know, a couple of comrades. I know a few comrades got over the fence and all that sort of stuff, but we didn't get it down. So in that sense, it was a failure. But it was a very militant protest of showing what needs to be done. Because we have year after year now of these polite, respectable, middle-class refugee protests which achieve nothing, really, and that where we need a militant movement, and that governments have done nothing. Labor and Liberal, we need a voice that says, and one thing, somebody in Parliament who says, well, we've got to go more beyond polite protests. You know, we're for ripping down the fences, and we're for building a mass movement to do it. And that's the sort of movement that Liz stands for and wants to fight for. And that's why we need to get people like her into Parliament.
Well, we're going to have, after Mick and Liz wrap up, we're going to chat to Aaron Mavaganam. So we're going to talk a lot about the refugee campaigning, the direct action that people have been involved in to rip down the fences. Well, just before we sum up this part, I wanted to also, I was 2 when Liz was involved in her high school activism. And when I was just born when Mick founded Socialist Alternative, the organisation that made me a socialist. So actually, the generational gap is slightly there. But one of my first memories of being like politically conscious of the things happening in the world was during one of my trips to the city. I saw all these stickers everywhere about Max Brenner, and they were just like covering all of the poles, and some of them were slightly weathered. And I was like, Max Brenner, isn't that, it looks quite violent and bloody. And I was like, what's going on here? And I only found out later when I joined, I think we have a slide next. When I became a socialist at university, I only found out later that it was, socialists like Liz that were involved in a campaign against, the Max Brenner chain, the Israeli-owned, coffee chain, funding and supporting the IDF in Israel. So why don't you, Liz, tell us a bit about that? And I think also we have some other pictures of some of the other things happening in 2011. That's when that was, of some of the big struggles, Occupy, a massive strike that happened in Laverton in Bayeda. So why don't you, tell us about that?
Cool. Well, before I do want to say I didn't just go and plant trees. I was also suspended from my university degree for 6 months. And it was probably the best thing that happened to me, because it did mean that I decided to junk law. I was not going to go back to constitutional law. It was so boring. And instead decided to continue my arts degree, but in particular to dedicate myself to politics and being active. So in terms of the protests against Max Brenner, it was about solidarity with Palestine. This company was giving care packages to some of the most brutal of units in the Israeli army while they were, waging war on Gaza, massacring Palestinian people, committing all sorts of war crimes. There was a call from Palestinian civil society to boycott, divest, and have sanctions against Israel and Israeli companies. And we took up that campaign to say we stand in solidarity with this international struggle for freedom against war. And, we'll do our bit by targeting this company. And instead of just sort of leafleting out the front, we thought, let's have a blockade. Let's try and shut down the company. And we had a protest, and we'd line up in front of the company, and the police came to try and break up the protest. In particular, use police snatch squads, which they use quite regularly now, where they'd go in and with 10 of the riot police to grab someone and arrest them. And I forget what it was the Max Brenner 13, 12? 19 of us were arrested for our solidarity with Palestine. I was one of those people. And in the end, we spent a month in court, actually, in defending ourselves and our right to protest. And we came out with a win in that court case. It was really quite a drag to sit in court for that long. We could have been doing something more useful. But we did establish the right to protest in public-private areas. So Max Brenner was located in QV. So the QV had previously been a public hospital. When it became a private shopping centre, there was an agreement that areas had to be kept open to the public. And they tried to say that we were trespassing on private land. Well, actually, that wasn't the case. And we, in defending our right to protest, established this basic civil liberty that people in law degrees still actually study, the case of Max Brenner and the right to protest. So, it was wonderful, not just in terms of our international solidarity, but also for our basic democratic rights. Oh, yeah. Okay, so 2011 was a big year. That was the year of these Palestine protests. It was also the year of the Occupy Melbourne movement. That's when we occupied City Square for a whole week, I think it was, and in the end were violently evicted. It was an amazing protest, actually, because thousands of people came to the centre of the city around the call of, there's no real democracy in our society. Politics is rigged for the rich. Sound familiar? It's part of our campaign right now. We're the 99%. The 1% rule our society. They have all the wealth. We need to take our society back and occupy public spaces and, and reclaim our world. So it's part of a global movement that was Occupy Wall Street and then also Occupy movements through Europe, and we brought it to Melbourne. And the thing about that movement was, it brought in people also from the outer west, from the outer suburbs. Usually as activists, we're campaigning a lot in the city, on university campuses, and you don't get to meet a lot of people in the outer suburbs who also are pissed off and critical about the way our world works. And having this protest spot in the middle of the city that was easily accessible, that was getting publicised, meant that we actually met heaps and heaps of young workers who came through the occupation and were wanting to talk to us about our socialist politics. But yeah, we were removed in advance of the Queen actually visiting, I think it was. Shame. So the protest, the Baiada strike that I did want to talk a bit more about was really an important moment for me, but also just in terms of strike action in the West. It was a 13-day strike of workers at a chicken processing plant in Laverton. And we'd met some of the union organisers at the Occupy movement, and they said, there's a strike brewing, we'd like your support. When the call comes out, can you come out and support our picket lines? And so a few weeks, or maybe a week or so after the Occupy eviction, the call came out, the strike is on, picket lines are on, we need your help. And these people who were on strike were some of the most abused and exploited workers in this country. They had people who were on $8 an hour cash in hand. That something like 10% of the workforce were off at any period of time because of injuries, because it was such an unsafe place. And in fact, a year earlier, before the strike, a worker called Saril Singh had actually been murdered, decapitated by some of the processing machinery. And the workers had been told to clean up the blood and his body and to get that machine going within 2 hours of his death, which gives you a feel for the power of bosses over people's lives and how they will degrade us if they can get away with it. So this strike was truly heroic for these people who were so abused and so downtrodden to actually take a stand and say, we're fighting back. We're fighting for decent pay and conditions, but also for dignity. We want respect. That was one of the main things that people talked to us about. And on the night that the picket line got established, the police came, as usual, to try and break up that picket line. And they came in with dozens of police. But we had 3-4 lines of protesters linking arms, and we forced the police to retreat. They had to do this backwards walk from their line, like robots. I was so elated. We were all so elated. It was one of the best moments in our lives, I think, to have that temporary victory. But then in the end, the strike continued, and they had a victory against their employers. And that's something that Victorian Socialists are committed to, standing alongside workers fighting back for their rights, fighting for dignity. We'll hear a bit later from Viraj, who's been on strike was on strike for over 40 days. We also have Danny Humphreys, I think it is, who has been on strike as well at Kenos, a major petrochemical company. So standing in solidarity with workers in the West, having someone in Parliament that can champion their fights and call on people to join them to spread their struggle, that's something that we want to see a socialist in Parliament doing.
Great. Well, yeah, so what we're going to do is talk about that in the next section. But I want to thank Liz and Mick for coming up to share a little bit about how they got involved in activism. And I'm sure many people here as well were involved in some of the actions that we talked about in Occupy, in the Baiada strikes. But I wanted to now do away with Mick and invite Aaron up actually to talk about some of the incredible and heroic refugee activism that Liz and members of the Victorian Socialists, but many people here have been involved in. I think that it's a really important thing to talk about. Goes back decades. So I'll just invite up Aaron. Can you? No. Break next. Great. Okay. Well, to introduce him to people that may not know Aaron Mulvarganam is probably one of the most incredible refugee activists, I think, in Australia. One of the founding members of the Tamil Refugee Council and, a member of the Victorian Socialists in the federal election, was our Senate candidate for the federal upper house. So I think that one of the first slides we have is, Liz and Aaron together at a action against the, very long-term campaign opposing the deportation of Priya and Nades from Billawheeler. So the first kind of question I have, I suppose, for you, Aaron, is you and Liz we chatted about how you've been involved in refugee activism quite a long time together. So what are some of your first memories, I suppose, of the campaigns that you were involved in?
Yeah, firstly, when I came to this country as a refugee back in 1997, I was involved in the Labour Party around the Tampa crisis. I was a member from 2002 to 2009. My experience with the Labour Party was that, I left in 2009 over the way they were working with the Sri Lankan government to aid the genocidal actions of the Sri Lankan state. And then when refugees came to this country in 2009 and 10, thousands of Tamil refugees came to this country, Labour Party, rather than welcoming these people, decided to lock them away, gave negative security assessments to tens of refugees, introduced enhanced screening process and deported back over 1,500 asylum seekers over a short period without even assessing their protection claims. So it was under these circumstances I founded Tamil Refugee Council in 2011, and it was under these circumstances I met Liz. I think I met Liz in 2010 at the World Refugee Day rally. Liz has been a huge supporter for the Tamil Refugee Council. Every time we needed support, Liz will be out there. She has been a guiding light, and she continues to be a guiding light for the Tamil refugee community in Australia. Some of the actions that I remember of Liz, Liz and I together. The first one was in 2012 when Anjan, a Tamil refugee who was to be deported back by the Gillard government to Sri Lanka, despite him having cut his throat. They decided to deport him with a doctor on the plane to Sri Lanka. And I called Liz and told her that this man is about to be deported back. Liz, came out to help us straight away, and had other socialist comrades as well, forming a picket line outside the detention center in Maribyrnong. We stayed there till we made sure this man's deportation didn't proceed. Today, Anjan is part of our community 10 years on because of that action led by Liz Walsh. In fact, Anjan is actually volunteering for us in this election campaign. Same year, at the end of 2012, the late Trevor Grant led a cricket campaign against boycott campaign against the Sri Lankan cricket team, and Liz again played a crucial role in gathering support, helping us build the campaign. It was a quite well-publicized campaign. Tamil struggle until then didn't receive much support from the mainstream media. That was the campaign that actually, exposed the human rights abuses that were taking place in Sri Lanka, the cruelty Australian government was inflicting on Tamil refugees. And Liz played a crucial role in that. And then, the campaign against PNG deal. As the Labour Party was about to get thrown out of power, the last thing that they did was reopen Papua New Guinea and Nauru detention centres. And to this day, so many refugees are suffering because of that action by the Labour Party. And they've been in power for more than 5 months now. They, don't seem to have learned a lesson from their past mistakes. And, there's so much I could talk about, the things that you did, Liz. And the reason why so many refugees are here tonight is because, we thank Liz and Victorian Socialists for consistently fighting for refugee rights.
It was pretty magical when we stopped that deportation, the deportation of Anjan. No, yeah, that was when we heard that we had won, and it was pretty special. I mean, usually in the refugee campaigning, there's not a lot of victories, there's a lot of defeats. It's hard, so it was pretty special to actually stop. Help to delay, I guess, the deportation so that the court proceedings could come in. I think the point about the PNG deal is really important, that for the refugee movement, we've had to be prepared to fight back no matter who's in power. And that has been actually an argument in the refugee movement. A lot of people have wanted to go quietly, to think that, Rudd will deliver, Gillard will deliver. We don't need to, we can just ask nicely, lobby them behind closed doors. What we need is a movement that's prepared to force the Labour Party away from their brutal, cruel anti-refugee policies. So the PNG deal was a moment where we said we've got to get people on the streets. The government is saying we will not let anyone who comes to Australia by boat ever resettle in Australia. And we will put you for year upon year in a terrible camp in the middle of the ocean, Pacific Ocean, on Nauru or Manus Island, and we will let you rot for year upon year. And we got thousands of people week after week onto the streets chanting 1, 2, 3, fuck the ALP, I think was the most popular chant of this very youthful protest. But yeah, that is something in terms of building a socialist movement. We need to build a political alternative to the Labour Party that don't just want to manage the system for the rich in terms of imposing wage cuts on workers right now. They're also continuing with their brutal anti-refugee policies, turning refugee boats back. People fleeing from Sri Lanka, boats are being turned back. We still have people on Manus Island, on PNG and on Nauru. We still have people locked up in detention centres, and people here tonight who are on bridging visas that haven't even been promised any protection visas, which is absolutely shameful. So we need to keep on organising and fighting and building a political alternative to the Labour Party, one that stands 100% on the side of people fleeing for their safety, fighting for freedom of movement all around the world.
Yeah, I think this is a picture of Liz at those early rallies against the PNG deal. So, most recently, I suppose for a lot of us here, we've been involved in another unique moment of success in the refugee campaign against the Park Hotel prison that was set up in Victoria. I think we have a photo of Liz speaking at one of those events where, the Victorian state government alongside the Australian federal government set up a concentration camp basically in the middle of Melbourne where they held refugees for over 12 months, nearly 2 years at the end of it, that were medevaced here from the camps offshore. And these people were kept in hotel rooms for all of those months, never allowed outside of those 4 walls. And it was, the kind of relentless effort of refugee activists, the daily protests, the weekly protests that were called by the Campaign Against Racism and Fascism, and the activism as well of the refugees themselves inside those hotels that actually saw all of them eventually freed. Not entirely, unfortunately, there's still a way to go because they were only put on community visas, but I think, it demonstrates the capacity actually to fight back and the importance of fighting back wherever we can. So I guess to wrap up this little segment, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Aaron, was one of the things we were talking about is the situation that we face today with the Labor Party just recently elected, and what it would mean, what you think it would mean to have a socialist elected into Parliament, and how that would shape the refugee campaign going forward. I think we have a nice picture of you guys together as well, just for to talk about this part. Yeah, Aaron's Facebook cover photo. Did some detective work for this slideshow.
Well, what it means to have Liz elected to Parliament, and we got Nigathan here, founder of Tamil Feast, who was locked away in detention by the Labor government for over 6 years after he was given negative security assessment. He came to this country in 2009. It's been 13 years. He's been separated from his family and continues to struggle with travel ban and all that. And it's not because of what the Liberal Party has done, but what the Labor Party started back in 2009 to 2013, and they seem to continue with their policies. Having a socialist elected to Parliament means we can, the way we fight racism of the Australian state is by building a movement. Having a socialist in Parliament helps us build mass movement to, fight against all these issues. We're talking about refugees. Some of them might get some sort of solution in the next couple of months because of all the protests that are taking place. But so many issues will continue to exist under Labor Party as well. Having a socialist in Parliament is the way to challenge these things. Like a socialist can speak out about the issues that we're facing. A socialist can provide resources for us to better build our campaigns.
Yeah, and we want to use it as a platform to build movements, as you said. It's about trying to build that collective struggle on the streets, and having someone in Parliament that can help resource the Tamil Refugee Council, can encourage people to resist alongside you, that, we think would be a major breakthrough for the socialist movement. And, let's make it happen, huh?
Cool. Well, thanks for coming up, Aaron. And we're going to take a break now, and before we move into the second part of the night, which is a bit of, evening, mid-afternoon. We'll come back and talk about some of the things that Victorian Socialists have been involved in today, and some of the kind of struggles that people have been, that Jorge's been involved in council, as well as, the recent abortion protests, some of those sorts of things. But in the break, I would encourage everyone to go and grab some food. So the way that it sounds pretty good to me. It's some sausages and salad. So we have pork and fennel sausages, chorizo, and vegan options. And you can just grab, them up the back. It's $10 or $15 if you want to pay solidarity. This is a fundraiser, so we are trying to get through the last leg of the campaign. Not to spoil it, but we've done some pretty amazing things so far. Over 100,000 doors have been knocked by Victorian Socialists volunteers, which is pretty incredible across the north and the west. But a lot of it is costing money, unfortunately, for, putting up the advertising and getting all the letters into people's letterboxes. So I encourage everyone to check out the raffle, some amazing prizes, good food hamper, as well as, grab some food, grab a drink, and we'll come back in like 10 minutes or so. Oh, and sign. Oh, right. And the other really important thing is that beyond the money, we actually really need people. We need your people power. And we would love to see everyone help us out on the 26th, which is the election day. The state election, this is the winnable campaign for us. Ever since 2018 and our first campaign, we've been aiming to get elected into the state parliament in this election in 2022. So 4 years in the making, we want as many people as possible on the ground with us. I think everyone with radical, credentials that wants to see a better world will be helping us on polling day. So please join us, and you can sign up over here with Josh. Great. All right. Okay, I don't know how to bring everyone back in. Woo! So, no, that didn't work. Okay, we're gonna get back into it now. So just while everyone's finding their seats and everything, finishing off their meals, I just wanted to begin with, okay, comrades up the back. It's a very important and very exciting comrade that's going to be speaking to us. So before we get back into the kind of format of in discussion with Jorge and Liz, I'm just going to invite up Viraj. Viraj is very impressive long-term trade unionist, a delegate for the CFMEU. And he has recently been on strike with his workmates for over 40 days. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but they were successful, and they won a series of things out of that strike. So Viraj is going to talk a little bit about, the vision that Victorian Socialists have for unions and industrial action, and the importance actually of the workers' movement and of union power actually at the centre of really what the Victorian Socialists want to rebuild here in Melbourne. So welcome Viraj, who's going to speak to us for a little bit.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, I'm one of the 74 workers at the Canoof plasterboard factory in Port Melbourne. We have only just gone back to work after being out on strike for 40 days. Canoof is the biggest plasterboard company in the world. They control half of the market in Australia. The strike started when Canoof management locked us out for asking for decent pay rise and safe staffing levels. Management wanted to introduce more labour hire and casualize our jobs. They only offers us a pay rise, not even half of the level of inflation. In other words, they wanted us to take a massive pay cut. We told them to get staff. This company makes plenty of money from our labor. The part of Canoof that we work for, formerly Boral, paid their top 6 executives a combined $5.7 million last year. Management has cost every single one of our claims at $1 million per year, a fraction of top management salaries. Management has cost every single one just $1 million. I'm just going to repeat that. It seems they value their executive salaries more than our job security and wages. And they wanted to be able to break our power by introducing labour hire. We are a strong CFMU workplace. When management put their substandard EBA to a vote, not a single worker voted for it. When we had a vote for industrial action, every single worker voted for every type of industrial action. When we put bans on, management locked us out. So we voted to turn the lockout into an indefinite strike. Five weeks later, we won a new agreement that ended management's dreams of introducing more labour hire and gave us a significantly higher pay rise. It's important to say we did not just do this for ourselves. We fought for everyone who will work for Canoof in the future. We fought for all of the workers in construction, manufacturing, and other industries who are facing casualized jobs and cuts to their pay because of inflation. We have been supported all the way through by our union and by many other groups, including Victorian Socialists. Liz was there from the beginning, leading the chants and speaking to the strikers to keep the fight going. I have known Liz for a long time. I first met her in the campaign for refugee rights many years ago. Since then, I have helped lead a couple of major strikes. One at Kanoof and another massive wildcat strike at Woolworths Distribution Centre where we stopped labour hire, as well as a lot of other industrial campaigns. I want to be clear. If it wasn't for the help of Liz, Jerem, and other comrades in Victorian Socialists, none of this would have been possible. Literally, hundreds of workers in the West have better pay and conditions because of the active roles played by Victorian Socialists. They are staunch fighters and dedicated organizers. We need them in Parliament to be a voice for the voiceless, to help organize the unorganized, and to call out and shame those in power who are usually well beyond the reach of ordinary people. We need them in Parliament so they can raise hell and fight alongside working class people and the oppressed. That's why I'll be an active part of Victorian Socialist election campaign, and I hope everyone here will be too. So let's make history on November 26. Let us send fighting socialists into Parliament. Solidarity, comrades.
Thanks, Viraj. Well, whilst Jorge comes up, yeah, I think a core part of what Viraj was talking about is, I guess, the absence right now in our political system of anyone that really wants to take the side of the working class. And I think that's the case for quite some time now, you know, decades actually, since anyone that talks about ordinary people actually means workers and means the conditions that people work under, the wages that we get, the living conditions and the cost of living actually that we're subjected to. And all of the things that we're told, you know, the result of just market variations or crises beyond our control are actually the political decisions that have been made by the politicians, the people in government for decades to screw over our side and to line the pockets of the rich and powerful. So I am also very excited about the idea of hopefully being able to inspire what I think is in every workplace, which are people like Viraj, people like everyone here, who are sick and tired of being, you know, roughshod over just to see their bosses make more money at the end of every annual quarter. And hopefully someone like Liz and Jerem in the North can inspire people to, yeah, take that step towards strike action, can see Viraj's story, can see the story of all the strikes that many people here have been involved in and think, okay, well, let's do that here. So yeah, thanks for speaking, Viraj. And it's always a really excellent, yeah, I love hearing from everyone doing the industrial work that's members of Victorian Socialists. So anyway, Jorge Jorquera, who is our councillor, our councillor here in Maribyrnong, on the City of Maribyrnong Council, the first elected member of the Victorian Socialists, elected from the Yarraville ward, and quite a surprise to all of us in a way. It happened in 2020 when I'm sure anyone that's been involved in the Victorian Socialists or has been around us for a second or so knows that really our strength is in the ground game, the capacity and desire for people to get out there and argue politics to people. In 2020, we couldn't do any of that because of the COVID pandemic that was ripping through and continues to rip through, you know, our healthcare systems, society. So it was largely a letterbox campaign and an online campaign, and we got a lot of support out of it, missed out on Liz getting elected to council by 1 vote, but luckily had Jorge get elected. So by 1 vote, by a couple of votes. So don't let anyone ever tell you your vote doesn't count. So Well, like Liz, I wanted to start with Jorge telling us a little bit about how he became an activist and maybe some of his memories as well of kind of the radical West. Unfortunately, unlike Liz, I couldn't get into Jorge's family albums to photocopy and put on the slideshow, so that will have to wait. But we do have some that come later. But why don't you tell us, a little bit about how you became a radical activist?
Thanks, Catherine. Well, it's a pity you didn't get any of those old photos because people might have got a chance to see my afro. It's true. Like a lot of immigrants, but certainly like a lot of Chileans who came here as exiles, as I did with my family in the late 70s, we were all sort of political from the first instant. Most of us tended to join 2-3 different things, and my trajectory probably wasn't very different. So we arrived here in hostels in Brisbane, and I pretty promptly, I think at the age, I think I was about 13, 14, I joined the Labor Party, the Carina branch, which later spawned Peter Beattie, for those of you who've got any history, sadly, one of the very right-wing Labor premiers in Queensland. I joined the Labor Party at about 13, and simultaneously I was involved in Chilean solidarity work, like we all were, in particular with a group called the Movement of the Revolutionary Left. And also, like a lot of Latin Americans, of course, I was very active from that young age in sort of community type work. Principally, in my case, it's the first time I came to Melbourne, actually, was for a National Council of St. Vincent de Paul. I was involved a lot with sort of left wing of the Catholic Church, as there was back then. Again, a very common experience in terms of Latin American politicos, I suppose. So after that, I sort of became, I suppose, more or less a full-time political activist. Funnily enough, I've been elected a few times accidentally to positions. This was not the first. I think I told some comrades another story, probably worth telling, just purely because it's a bit funny. Another example of a sort of relatively accidental election. Back when I was about 17, I went to Queensland University. I was still an independent leftist, set up a socialist group with a few mates, etc. Anyway, ended up in a coalition campaign for the student union against the Labor people then. Queensland University Student Union back then was probably the biggest student union in the country next to Melbourne Uni, maybe bigger actually in terms of our budget. It was a multi-million-dollar budget. We ran everything, the cafeteria, etc. Anyway, the left didn't think much that we had much chance of winning, and I still remember the day we were putting in our nomination forms. We're sitting around the cafeteria, and there's mostly a few sort of people who were in resistance, a lot of anarchists, myself, etc. And one of these anarchists turns around to me and goes, "Oh, Jorge, I really don't want to run for this position of General Secretary of the Student Union here. Do you want to run for it?" I said, "Oh, whatever." I mean, I didn't know what it was. And funnily enough, got elected. So it's happened more than once. And as I said, from then on, been politically active for a long time, full time, I suppose. Came to the West a few times, ended up settling, I suppose, for want of a better term, here. Back in first time around, because I've been here sort of on and off, was in the very late 80s, early 90s, when this was a very different place. I know some of you have lived here back then. This is when it, where I suppose unfairly Footscray got its Footscary, name. And occasionally believe it or not, occasionally walking from Yarraville Station to where I lived was a little bit hairy if it was a very late train. Very different place, but a beautiful place to live in terms of the humanity of it. So back then Yarraville was, full of the old sort of Greek, Macedonian community, many of whom are still there, the old generations, much younger back then. All the cafes, they weren't the groovy cafes selling $6 lattes. They were the Macedonian cafes selling the cheap but beautiful Greek or Turkish coffee. Beautiful place to live. A lot of solidarity, as I said, a lot of protests, some big ones. I particularly remember the really big one, if someone can correct me the figures, really big one to save the Bulldogs. I think it was 10,000 people on the streets to save the Bulldogs, and actually organised by leftists. Some key people in that organising coalition were old members of the Socialist Workers' Party, which by then I was a member. And we had quite a number of people out here living here. So, yeah, I suppose a very rich history out here. that we've now become a really important part, or in fact, if you like, we've inherited a lot of that rich history, and we should be proud to inherit that history of the community, but also of the left that's been part of the West for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was one of the first things doing any political activity with you, Jorge, that was just like so self-evident, was just your love for the West and also your community connections and your sporting connections. So it makes a lot of sense that the thing that sticks out is saving the Bulldogs. Although wrong football, right? Wrong football. But well, yeah, since obviously your second accidental, although we did try quite hard to get you elected, so it was intentional, maybe a surprise. Election to the council here in Maribyrnong. There's been a lot of campaigns that we've run through the Victorian Socialists, a lot of communities that we've worked with. So we have some photos of some of those up here. I mean, it's really your pick to which you'd like to chat about, because I think there's a lot to be quite proud of that you've done on council, a lot of campaigns that you've been involved in. So, yeah.
I mean, yeah, as I say, there's a lot. One thing that just struck me the other day, one of our comrades campaigning, door knocking, mentioned that knocked on a door and an Ethiopian woman answered, and after some conversation asked him or her, I'm not sure if the comrade was who it was, but asked the comrade, have you seen those racism no signs? And he said, yes, we were a big part of that, etc. And she said, it's one of the things that made me feel welcome when I came to Melbourne. And it's probably, if nothing else, it's tokenistic in some ways, but I think that campaign will be something that we should proudly hold up as something that Vic Socialists did unique. There is no council in Victoria. There's quite a few in New South Wales. No other council in Victoria as yet, I think one is about to, that has adopted that campaign. And those signs are everywhere. I cycle a lot around here, so I actually see them in places you wouldn't, if you drive, you wouldn't see them. But in all the sort of the swimming pools, the children's playgrounds, if you go to any of the big children's playgrounds at Hanson's Reserve, etc., everywhere there's those signs, multilingual, there'll be English on one side, Chinese, Italian on the other, Spanish on the other. And even though that wasn't associated with a specific campaign, in many ways it did come out of the community. One of the reasons that sort of came to mind as an initiative that would be worthwhile for us was the fact that I got numerous, not that many, but a few texts from people just after I was elected pointing out that there had been an increase in far-right graffiti in the West. And I distinctly remember the day I thought we really should do something about this, is when I got a particular one, which was someone who sent me photos of swastikas that had been painted all down MacGyver Reserve. Now, probably many of you have never been there, but it's a big reserve. A lot of children's sports gets played. It's probably the single biggest concentration. You've got a footy club, a cricket club, the biggest soccer club in the West there. You've got a lacrosse club. That's new, newish, etc. So it's probably the biggest sporting complex area in the West. And there were all these swastikas graffitied onto the main walking path there. So it was a prompt, that even though we live in this very multicultural place and very accepting place, that we've got to fight that racism constantly. It's such a big tool of the conquer and divide of politics in this country. It's been there since day one. It's never going to go away, bar a revolutionary change in this country. It is a key aspect of control in Australia. So that was particularly, I thought, a good initiative for us, and one that will stick. It'll, people know it, they'll be there for a long time. Probably worth mentioning, campaigns also that January 26th connected to that. That's still going. As well as, interestingly, I think it's worth comrades and supporters of Vic Socialists knowing that we've also been able to do a lot in terms of profiling socialist perspectives on the environment on council. And in fact, you'd be amazed at how many environmentalists, local environmentalists, come to us first often to discuss, can we do something here? Not because I don't think the Greens have the right view, they do on many of these issues we're talking about, but because they know we're the ones that will put up a stink on council. We'll actually do the work against the bureaucrats, etc., to get motions up, do the heavy lifting, if you like, And that's exactly what we want to do in the upper house with Liz and Jerem.
Yeah, I didn't include it. I thought about it, but I didn't, which was a photo of probably one of the first political actions I took alongside you in the West, which I came along to, which was a bicycle down Barclay, a bike safety event, quite important actually, down Barclay Street, which is, one of the most dangerous really roads for cyclists in Melbourne. And I feel like at most events that I've been with at you're wearing a bicycle helmet. So the thing of being an environmental warrior is quite evident, I feel. But it's true. In terms of some of the other campaigns we've been involved in, I guess the encroachment of the far right in the West is such a contradictory phenomena because it is such a multicultural, welcoming place at the same time as actually, quite confident far right activists going around putting up stickers. We had quite a large take-up of the campaign against racism and fascism, ran around being pro-vax, pro-union and anti-fascist during the big demonstrations of the far right just last year. And, I think as well the over-policing, the very racialized policing that largely the young Sudanese youth experience here in the West. We've had demonstrations about that in front of, protests against those stop and searches happening at Footscray Station. I think the great thing about having Victorian Socialists on council so far, I think, has been the fact that lots of community activists know where to go when they need help building their campaigns, when they need help boosting, the sense of kind of confidence to fight back against a whole series of things. So, well, the last kind of question I wanted to ask you, I mean, the other thing that I think is one of the most prominent campaigns you've been involved in, Jorge, was the saving of the Vietnamese bilingual program, which is a local program in schools, Viet Speak, this is a great little mural that Van Rudd did, who's a local, who's the candidate actually for the St Albans electorate here for the Victorian Socialists in the lower house. And he also donated a great little sketch that he did of the Flemington racecourse fiasco when the floodplains were redirected into housing to save the racecourse recently, shamefully. But I guess, as the lone current elected member of the Victorian Socialists, what do you think it would mean to have, another elected member like Liz or Jerem?
Well, I think it's probably, we're definitely speaking to the converted to say that we need more troublemakers in those sort of seats of power, parliament, those bureaucracies of government, basically calling out the system. In this country, like in every country, there is a rich history of troublemakers in politics, but sadly, most in this country have been rather harshly straitjacketed by their associations with the Labor Party. There are exceptions to that, and of course probably the most notable historically and worth us sort of recalling as part of our tradition, I think, in certain ways, obviously not in every way, was the Communist Party's only member of parliament in this country, elected in 1944 in the seat of Bowen in Queensland Parliament, Fred Patterson, who actually also was a councillor in the area of Gladstone from 1927 on before he got elected to Bowen. And he probably stands out in history as the only sort of independent rabble-rouser. Not to say, as I said, there haven't been those in the Labor Party. One of the reasons that I left the Labor Party when I did in my teens was on the back of, because I was a supporter of George George's. And George George's, for those who remember, for all his faults, by today's standards in the Labor Party, was far left, very far left. And, of course, he ended up being chucked out of the party in 86 when I left, and then sat for 2 years as an independent. But, as I said, most of the troublemakers in Australian history have been straitjacketed by that association with Labor. To have independent socialists who are not straitjacketed by that Labourism, which of course has become a much harsher straitjacket in the era of neoliberalism. The room to move that some of those Labor Party rabble-rousers had even into the sort of 80s, the Joan Coxes, if you're talking Victoria, the Bill Hartleys, etc., for all their faults, they had a bit of room to move. There is no such room, and there has been not even a tiny bit of room for rabble-rousing inside the Labor Party in the last couple of decades. So we need more than ever independent, fighting socialists in Parliament. As Viraj said, to be the voice of the voiceless, to be the troublemakers that call out the system, that call out the rulers who are, I mean, one of the things it's worth reflecting, because I think we'll find a lot of this when we get elected, not if, when we get elected in Parliament, that some of your biggest battles are with the bureaucracies that grease the wheels of capitalism. It's not even the politicians who half the time are actually bowing to the chief bureaucrats. These are people, even in this council, right, which is a small council and actually where our senior officers are probably paid some of the lowest wages. You are talking about CEOs on over 350. A typical CEO in Victoria is on 400 plus, by quite a bit more than the Prime Minister. Bureaucrats grease the wheels of capitalism. They are the key in many ways, and they are, in many respects, the puppeteers, if you like, of these parliamentarians. Obviously, of course, there are many parliamentarians in right-wing politics, especially, who are strategic thinkers in terms of saving capitalism. But a lot of them can't think for fucking nuts. It's these bureaucrats that serve them the lines, literally serve them the lines, and effectively, write up the policies. If you like, every time you see an initiative, whether it's the new Electricity Commission or whatever, that was written by a leading fucking bureaucrat, a departmental secretary, and it's been basically coloured a little bit red or a little bit blue, depending on who is in government. But essentially, that's why they always look the same. And that's one of the battles we'll be having on a much bigger scale than you have on council, especially once you start to fight for any little sort of crumbs that you might be able to win. I'll probably leave it on this. I think the most important thing we'll be able to do with Liz and Jeremy in those positions, and we've done it on a much smaller scale here in council, but we'll be able to do it on a much bigger and more important scale, is basically walk alongside people in their struggles. So they might be little struggles, big struggles, struggles we lose mostly, struggles we win sometimes, but by walking alongside those people, they get a sense of how important socialist leadership is. And when struggles erupt, when new opportunities emerge, we can be there to play a leading role.
Thanks, Jorge. Well, yeah, I think you said it best. So I might not even try and editorialize that. I think if you agree with, I guess, the arguments, I really want to encourage people as well, if you haven't already, to sign up to help us on election day on the 26th. And we'll also be out on the polls from the 14th when pre-poll starts. And if the federal election is anything like, if the state election is anything like it, nearly 50% of people voted early. So on booths where we had people handing out for the Victorian Socialists, even if you didn't feel like you could necessarily make the arguments, but just getting, the letters into people's hands, it went from, 1% of the vote up until 5% of the vote. And then on booths where we had quite a few people helping out, where we could really get to everyone, we got, 10% of the vote. We outpolled the Greens on some. And we really made an argument, and a lot of people that we've spoken to in the door knocking since remember us from those polls because we're the only people there that were actually trying to argue to people and say you should really think about whether or not these major parties deserve your vote, and actually put your stock in someone that's not going to make you promises, not going to say we're going to change the bureaucracy and change the face of capitalism, but say exactly what Jorge said, which is we want to struggle alongside you, we want to fight alongside you, and we're going to be relentless about it. And we're not interested in any kind of concessions. So if you would like to help, see someone like that in Parliament, we need as many people as we can. So you can sign up over there at the computers, or there's the QR code as well on all the posters. But thanks. Another round of applause for Jorge. Yeah. So we're just going to, our last speakers, I'm going to invite Liz back up and alongside one of her other long-standing comrades, which is Sarah Garnham. So, yeah. Sarah is the Footscray coordinator, the coordinator for the Western Metro campaign, so has her eye on many moving parts. She's also the person actually that played a pretty instrumental role in recruiting me to socialist politics. So, worth it, I'd say. I'd wager. But yeah, to jump into this part of the campaign, I just wanted to start with, Sarah, the question of the day, which is, what are your memories of Liz when you first became an activist? And I think we have some photos actually of some of the first campaigns you both were involved in. But
cool. Well, I know for a fact there are many, many photos, maybe more to come out when Liz wins. My first memory of Liz is the first socialist meeting that I ever went to, the first serious political thing I ever really did for the socialist movement, which was front up at Monash University in the old Menzies building to a meeting called The Biggest Terror Threat is the US War Machine. And this was in 2008. Just seeing that poster sort of electrified my heart, because I'd been involved in high school in fighting the Iraq War, which, tragically went ahead, a war that resulted in, million deaths, millions of refugees and trauma for people. And to find at Monash University a few years later that there were still people fighting at that point the absolute wave of Islamophobia that was sweeping Western countries, the turn towards the domestic campaign against Muslims that was just absolutely hysterical. And, Obama's campaign was in full flight, and it was like, this is great, a progressive face to racism and war and Islamophobia. And the socialists were standing against that in the most provocative, staunch way possible. Liz Walsh gave the talk at that meeting, and it was just, it was incredible to hear someone make no fucking apology in saying that the biggest criminals on earth are the US war machine, the Australian government that backs them, the UK government that backs them, and that's what we have to fight. It just, it set me on a path that I've never looked back from, and that's a big thanks to Liz for making such a serious case in the way she does. I'm sure lots of people here have had their first experience with Liz was hearing a speech she gave at one forum or another, and this one was very, very formative for me. And it sort of set up something that became really important to me about socialists, which is that socialists are people who fight even when it means taking a minority position, even when it means cutting hard against the mainstream, against all of the rhetoric and propaganda coming from, not just the most right-wing Sky News, whatever, but also smaller liberals who are like, oh, it's terrorism, it's such a problem, whatever. So taking that, the sometimes hard but minority position, principled position, is what marks socialists out, and also building movements around that. I was involved in many movements with Liz. Many have been talked about tonight. I think they connect to that first meeting I had with her as well, that, taking a stand for Palestine was cutting against everything that the establishment was saying at that time. Taking a stand for refugees as well. Again, it was cutting against everything that the ruling class, the media, Labor and Liberal were trying to pummel people with. And another movement that me and Liz were involved in quite early on, which is kind of weird to say this was a minority radical position, but we were involved in the marriage equality campaign. And today this seems like what an obvious thing. I mean, really, cheap shot, guys. Oh, I'm for marriage equality. Everyone's for that, whatever. It's basic. It is basic. When we were involved in protesting it, though, it was a handful of people, in the rain. That's my memory. I think I got involved in June. And, it was actually not a major, not a popular campaign. And it was socialists that headed that up and sort of, changed the tide on that. And Liz, I remember being, one of the central people in that, alongside other socialists in Melbourne and across Australia.
Yeah. The marriage equality campaign, it did start in the rain, and it was a small gathering of people at Federation Square, and the bill had just gone through, and something like 38% of people supported marriage equality, 44% opposed it. More people opposed marriage equality in the public than supported it. We were in a minority position, and had even smaller numbers on the ground. There was a bit of an idea that we could just lobby or have a high court challenge, but the Special Socialist contribution was to say, no, we need resistance on the streets. And we built a campaign. The Socialist Alternative was key to setting up equal love, and we were dogged. I think it was 2004 to 2009, and it was like a hard period, and then we started to get majority support, and we had to not just come up against Howard, who introduced the ban on same-sex marriage, but then the Gillard government that was in power from, and the Rudd government from, was it 2007 to 2013, we had to protest them as well. And eventually we won. We had tens of thousands of people in the streets fighting for marriage equality, and we were able to get 61.6% of people to say yes in the plebiscite all across the country. And so we shifted public opinion. The mass protest movement was key to changing people's ideas, which is fantastic to see the impact that you can have. And clearly, past struggles, the fact that there'd been the gay liberation movement, Mardi Gras, all the kind of pretty confrontational, really, protests in the 60s and 70s have been key to opening up a space for people to start becoming openly gay and lesbian, to be out and proud. But it was still a minority position. But that started to shift people's attitudes. People started to know somebody who was gay, their own daughter, their own cousin, whatever, workmate. And yet, despite all of that, you could still have a minority position of supporting marriage equality. So it was so important that we rallied people and said, we're going to resist this homophobic attack. And when people, the protests were awesome because they were also involving, overwhelmingly, some of them high school students who weren't about to get married. They weren't thinking, I really just want to, have my nuptials and, put a ring on it. Yeah, there was none of that. It was just, fuck this homophobia, and we're not going to stand for this state-sanctioned discrimination. And to be able to help get them on the streets and to feel emboldened to stand up to the homophobia in their lives, in school, wherever else, it was a really great contribution that the socialist movement has made. History making. Yeah.
Yeah, so, one of the things, I guess, that continues to colour, Australian politics and politics around the world, especially with the rise of the far right, is that, reactionary, intense, love for traditional family values and the reassertion of kind of the necessity of a man and woman being the only people that are allowed to be in a relationship with one another. And I think one of the big themes, actually, of the Victorian Socialists has been taking on the right, taking on the homophobia, the transphobia, and the aggressive sexism and misogyny of the right as well. And I know that, for people that don't know, one of our big, arch rivals, I suppose, in the West, someone that we really want to take down is Bernie Finn, who Liz has, quite a long standing, I guess, relationship's the wrong word, a long-standing, battle with, I suppose, that goes back many, many years. So we have some photos, actually, of Liz and another one of the Victorian Socialist candidates, Ros Ward. It's just in the north, though, and she's, founder of Safe Schools. But, flipping the bird to the annual March for the Babies protest. So, Liz, why don't you talk about, I guess, who we're up against in the West, but also your history with Bernie, and some of the protests for women's rights that we've been involved in as well, the Victorian Socialists.
So we're up against a whole cast of right-wing freaks, really. Not just Bernie Finn, but we have the much-hated Catherine Cumming, who is quite known in these areas. She used to be the mayor of Maribyrnong, real kind of right-wing small business opportunist politics, and she was elected to the Western Metro in 2018 through Darren Hinch's Justice Party, the Law and Order ticket. She's now running the Independence Party and hoping to get re-elected, and she's really tried to jump on the anti-vax, anti-lockdown kind of far-right, essentially, mobilisations. We had a bit of a run-in with her at a protest in Footscray. It was actually organised by Bernie Finn, this protest. He was trying to mobilise the right-wing business community to say no to a safe injecting facility in the West. There just was a bit of discussion that maybe we could have this basic healthcare. And he organised a rally against a safe injecting facility. Catherine Cumming was there as well. We had quite a few words because we helped with the counter-protest against that. And then we also organised our own standalone rally in support of healthcare. So yeah, Bernie Finn is probably the main high-profile rival for us. He is heading up the DLP, the Democratic Labour Party ticket, having been expelled from the Liberal Party, which is, no mean feat, a hard thing to do given that they are basically a Trumpite kind of, far-right outfit in terms of its actual membership these days. In fact, I just went to a forum in Point Cook, and the Liberal Party candidate for Point Cook is a total nutter. I decided to take a stand because I don't want to be jabbed anymore. That's she may as well, be with the Freedom Party or Catherine Cumming or whatever. But yeah, Bernie Finn got expelled because of his comments around when Roe V Wade was overturned, so the criminalisation of abortion in the USA, and he was praying that this came to Australia, even in cases of rape, that women would not have the right to choose. And he has a long history of trying to build an anti-abortion movement in Melbourne. In 2008, abortion was taken off the criminal code in Victoria, finally. And ever since then, he's organised an annual March for the Babies and attempt to recriminalise abortion rights in Victoria. So that's been fine for the Liberal Party all that time, that he's been their mouthpiece in the Western Metro and Parliament. And we've been organising counter-protests against Bernie Finn for many, many years. I remember I chaired the protest in, I think it was 2012, against Bernie Finn's March for the Babies. And of course this year we had a marvellous protest in defence of abortion rights in Melbourne, where we got 15,000 people out on the streets, which was pretty phenomenal. You think since the COVID pandemic mass protest, it hasn't really come back in the same kind of way. And to get 15,000 people on the streets was a real step forward, I think, for protest politics generally, and pretty wonderful that, around women's rights. And then I guess for us, the abortion rights demonstration was an example of how we have to be prepared to fight the right. The right have been making gains all around the world. We've seen in Italy the fact that there's now a fascist prime minister, the fact that we have Bolsonaro in Brazil just losing to Lula. We have a far right on the march, and they gain confidence in Australia when they see these gains. They gain confidence when they see our rights overturned. So it's so critical that we build a fighting left to take on the right. And I think, that's one of our aims with this election, is to knock out Bernie Finn, make sure Catherine Cumming doesn't get in, and to make sure also none of those Freedom Party anti-vaxxers get in. And voting for us first preference, we need to make that case to people. It will come down to a choice at the for that last seat in the Western Metro. Will it be Bernie Finn or some far right figure, or will it be a Victorian Socialist? That it matters that we get their first preference vote. So that's something we can talk to people on the line when we're campaigning.
A little short on time, but I did have a photo of you guys from the 2013. If you go back one, on the front lines against the when eggs were actually thrown at Bernie Finn, which we need to bring back. I think it'd be great to get Liz elected to egg, some of the people in there. Moira Deeming is also Bernie Finn's replacement for the Liberal Party, first on the ballot for them for the upper house, and that basically means she's pretty much 100% elected. It's going to happen. So, she's the replacement figure, and also the co-chair of the annual March for the Babies, the conspirator for Finn, who's actually said that she goes a lot further than him, which, if you can imagine, and that's someone that's going to be, possibly and probably in the upper house in the state of Victoria in the coming years. So having Liz with a couple of eggs in her pocket, I think would be very, very nice to see. And we did have a picture also of pretty amazing, for those, I'm sure many of you here were there, the huge Roe versus Wade solidarity protests against the overturning of it in the US, and to defend access to abortion rights and have them extended actually here in Australia is a really important argument. That happened in Melbourne earlier this year as well. So just to start to wrap up, because I think it's been a really lovely night, and we should start to wrap up, which is just to kind of talk about, I guess, where we're at now. As the campaign coordinator, Sarah, like, not only have you been part of, building, I suppose, these protests as well and getting the word out here in the West, which is, I'd say 80% of what we do is building people's knowledge of what's going on and the struggles that are taking place. I guess, what are the next steps for the campaign, and how do you think we've been going so far? How's Liz been going? Give an honest assessment.
Well, I mean, like, it's actually, I think it's been phenomenal. The Roe v Wade thing, that was in July. We'd barely begun then. And, that's our forte, me and Liz. Like, that's, get out, like, mobilize the masses. I mean, that was a pretty impressive one by Liz. 15,000 freaking people on the streets. Oh, my God. What a way to kickstart the campaign. And say to people, like, this is your activist. This is, someone that you can get behind because they're behind you. They're going to fight like hell. That was a pretty amazing start. And since then, we've done many other protests. We've had protests out in the West about, environmental destruction, about refugee rights, about workers' rights. And we've also just done the hard yards of talking to as many people as we possibly can. So I think we clocked last week over 50,000 doors that we have knocked in the western suburbs of Melbourne for this campaign. And that's from a starting of not much. Like we ran in the federal campaign, but we weren't able to knock nearly as many doors. We've leafleted so many people. We've done stalls everywhere. We've been calling people to sign them up for election day. And it really feels like something historical is going on here. So I'm really proud of everyone's effort. And I think that, like, just talking to someone in Sydenham yesterday, she said, she's a nurse. She'd heard of us a little bit at the start of the campaign, but by the time I knocked on her door yesterday, she was like, I've seen signs up everywhere. I'm like, really? In Sydenham? I don't know, like Footscray maybe. And she's like, yeah, everywhere. I'm like, wow, that is, we have really traversed the West, I guess. And that was the thing for her. She said, it makes you guys look serious. I'm behind you. So I think putting in all that effort has shifted people heaps of people can support our policies. They're excellent and they're common sense, like workers should get a pay rise. There's a cost of living crisis, no shit. But to actually say we're serious, we're putting in the work, we're going to deliver, that's something I think we've made some serious inroads into in this campaign. So yeah, fantastic so far. And all roads now lead to November 26th, election day. We need absolutely every boot on the ground so that we can get those votes, show more of those people that we're serious.
Well, a lot of tonight has been about my history, but obviously this campaign isn't just about me. It's about all of the dozens, if not hundreds of people we've been able to mobilise for this campaign, going out there and building support for a radical alternative to the status quo. And so this campaign is about trying to, I guess, get somebody in Parliament that can be a voice for all of us that are out there fighting every day, but also a voice for all of the people that we've been speaking to throughout this campaign. And as Sarah said, it's common sense that, privatisation has failed people. Our bills are going through the roof. We were sold privatisation on a lie. We were told that it would improve our living conditions. Well, it hasn't. With the fact that we have everything going up more and more expensive, our groceries, our bills, our rent, but what's not going up is our wages, and the fact that we're here to fight for wage rises for real workers. This connects with people. Our real challenge is that we need more and more people to help us get that message out to the people of the West. And when we are able to have the conversations, it really resonates. It's also wonderful, the campaign, because we've been able to connect with people who have been looking for an alternative, but living out in places like Sydenham. I know Saga had a wonderful connection that he made yesterday. A young Indian man, when he came out to Australia, he'd had history being a part of the radical left in India with the Communist Party, but had become disillusioned because, you know, their parliamentarians had all become, you know, too comfortable, accommodated to the elite, had stopped standing up for ordinary people, but was looking for something to be involved in. And, you know, being out in Sydenham, didn't know that we existed, that there is a socialist movement. And so building this campaign, whether we win or lose, we will have reached thousands and thousands of people with an argument. There is an alternative. There are people organising and resisting. And for those minority of people that want to get involved, that they can actually get active with us. So it's really valuable what we've been doing, you know, bringing socialist politics to masses of people out in the West and the North. So it's been a wonderful campaign. Hopefully we do get that win, because we can take this much, much further than just a few months of campaigning and getting the message to the thousands. We hope to get to the millions of people if we can get a platform in Parliament.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you so much for chatting to us all today. And another round of applause for, yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe not another one. I don't know. It felt right at the time. But yeah, I think the problem has always been for the left that we're too small. I think all of the things about, you know, the problems with capitalism, the fact that around us our planet is dying, you know, the inhumanities that the Australian government oversees, the constant march towards war that we're seeing again, you know, just everything you can think of really that needs to radically change. It's not for want of solutions. I think that, you know, you could go to any workplace, any street basically, and ask people, what do you think should be different? And they'll come up with a list of things of how things should change. That's not the problem. The problem is that we need a fight, and we need to be bigger to win that fight. So I think, you know, the Victorian Socialists, everything we've talked about tonight, it's not because, you know, Liz is this, you know, quite incredible for sure, activist and a really dedicated socialist, and someone who's not going to, yeah, what Mick said, you know, sit in a meeting and not say exactly what she thinks needs to happen and fight for that perspective. It's actually because there's plenty of people, just like everyone here tonight, just like Liz, who has the capacity to leave struggle, the capacity to win those struggles. I think the thing that we really need to do is transform that kind of underconfidence into, yeah, a confidence and a actual expectation that the world should be better and that they should demand better and be confident in doing that. So Victorian Socialists, that's what we want to do. We aspire to be the people that can actually, you know, tell people you're right to struggle. And I think having Liz in Parliament saying that when every single other, you know, member of the political class, member of the bureaucracy says the other opposite, says you should just put up with the way things are, vote for us in the next election and we'll change things. Having someone that says no, actually power is on the ground, power is from below, I think that would be a massive step forward for the working class here in Melbourne, and hopefully something that can inspire further struggle that can win in the future. So I look forward to standing on the polling booths with you all. And it's, for anyone that hasn't done it before, it's actually great. It's actually really, really nice because of all of the things that I just said. People have opinions about the world. They want it to be better and they like chatting to you about it.